At 02:45 hours local time, a Ukrainian drone tore through the open loading doors of a warehouse in Kotovsk and detonated inside. That strike had crossed nearly 300 miles of Russian territory to reach this single door. Inside sat cargo that Ukrainian intelligence valued at $1.3 billion. Within seconds, the fireball punched close to 800 feet into the night sky, a wall of flame and black smoke tall enough to blot out the nearby highway. And the target that burned was, on paper, nothing but an e-commerce warehouse. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what these buildings were supposed to be. On every map, in every registration document, the two sites were civilian logistics hubs operated by Wildberries, Russia's largest online retailer, the local equivalent of a national Amazon. Sorting floors, conveyor belts, parcels for ordinary customers. But according to Ukrainian military intelligence, the HUR, that civilian shell, had been quietly repurposed. Ukrainian officials allege the warehouses were being used to store and move drone components, navigation electronics, and frontline supplies. Military cargo hiding inside civilian packaging. The strike, they said, would erase 10 to 15% of Wildberries' entire storage capacity in a single night. And both hubs, Kotovsk in the Tambov region and Elektrostal on the doorstep of Moscow, sat deep inside Russian territory, far from any front line. That distance was supposed to be their protection, so was the disguise. Because who bombs a warehouse full of online orders? That was exactly the belief Ukraine intended to use against them. The operation was not built around speed. It was built around waiting. Ukrainian planners did not pick 02:45 at random. They picked it because it was the seam in the night, the shift change, when the outgoing guard crew handed off to the incoming one, when the radar operators were tired and the perimeter watch was thinnest. It was also the hour when the heavy trucks arrived. Intelligence had timed the delivery schedule. At that moment, the long-haul vehicles carrying components would be backed up against the docks. The great rolling doors hauled fully open for unloading, the interior of the warehouse exposed to the open sky. That was the moment the drones were waiting for, not the building, the opening. A sealed warehouse might have contained the blast. An open one would swallow the fire and feed it. So the drones hung silent beneath the low clouds, engines throttled back, and they waited for the doors to come up. But to reach those doors, they first had to survive the 300 miles in between. And the airspace around Moscow is among the most heavily guarded in all of Europe. The route to Kotovsk was not a straight line, and it was never meant to be. A long-range drone like the An-196 Lyutyy does not win by outrunning air defense. It wins by staying beneath it. For most of those 300 miles, the drones flew low, hugging the contours of the land, threading between hills and tree lines, riding the clutter that a radar beam struggles to read when it is aimed down toward the ground instead of up into clean sky. Every foot of altitude they gave up was a foot of detection range they took away from the men watching for them. Guarding a site like Kotovsk was the job of the Pantsir S-1. It is a short-range point defense system, a single vehicle carrying both surface-to-air missiles and a pair of rapid-fire autocannons, designed to be the last ring of protection over something valuable. On paper, it is fast and it is deadly. Its radar can pick up targets miles out. Its cannons throw thousands of rounds a minute. Against a fighter jet screaming in at high altitude or a cruise missile carving a clean, straight line across the sky, the Pantsir is exactly the weapon you want. But that is the problem. The Pantsir was built to stop things that behave like aircraft. Fast, high, loud, and radar bright. What came for Kotovsk behaved like none of those things. Think of a nightclub bouncer trained to spot troublemakers sprinting for the door. He watches for speed, for sudden movement, for anyone rushing the entrance. Now imagine the person he actually needs to stop is walking in slowly, head down, hugging the wall, moving no faster than the crowd around him. The bouncer's instincts, everything he was trained on, are tuned to the wrong target. That is a Lyutyy against a Pantsir, small radar signature, low and slow, buried in ground clutter. The threat the system was optimized to kill is not the threat that is arriving. And even when a Pantsir crew does get a fleeting return on their screen, they are racing a clock that is stacked against them. Consider the sequence. The radar has to catch the contact, the operators have to decide it is a threat and not a bird or a ghost. The turret has to slew onto the bearing, and only then can a missile leave the rail. Call it a handful of seconds, maybe 10, maybe 15 if the crew is sharp and awake at 0245. But in 15 seconds, a drone closing at low altitude covers well over half a mile of ground. By the time the launch order is given, the target has already moved out of the geometry the missile was calculated for. The system does not fail because it is broken. It fails because the math of the intercept was written for a different war. Kotovsk was only half the plan. The other half, Elektrostal, sat right against Moscow, shielded by something the pantsir did not need, an invisible wall of electronic noise. If Kotovsk was guarded by a gun, Elektrostal was guarded by silence. Sitting just outside Moscow, it fell under one of the densest electronic warfare umbrellas anywhere in the country, a wide-area jamming network built around systems like the Pol-21M. This kind of system does not fire a missile or throw up a wall of flak. It attacks something far more fragile, the signal a drone uses to know where it is. It floods the sky with GNSS interference, drowning out the faint whisper of GPS satellites overhead. To a drone leaning on satellite navigation, flying into that zone is like having the ground erased from under it. It still flies. It just no longer knows where it is going. For most attacking drones, that is the end of the mission. They wander, they drift off course, they miss by miles, or they simply give up and circle until they fall. Russian planners had come to trust that shield. The approaches to Moscow had swallowed drone after drone this way, and the assumption hardened into confidence. Nothing that relies on GPS gets through here, and that assumption is exactly where the twist lived. Because the drones that came for Elektrostal were not relying on GPS at the moment it mattered. As they crossed into the jamming zone and the satellite signal dissolved, they did not panic and they did not wander. They switched to an inertial navigation system, a self-contained package of gyroscopes and accelerometers that tracks every turn, every acceleration, every second of flight from a known starting point, and calculates position from motion alone. No outside signal required. In the final stretch, that dead reckoning was cross-checked against the shape of the terrain and landmarks below, correcting any drift as the target drew near. Here is the way to picture it. Imagine jamming a driver who is following turn-by-turn directions read aloud over the phone. Cut the call and he is lost. He was depending on a voice from outside to tell him where to go, but now imagine a driver who memorized the entire route before he ever left the driveway. You can jam every phone signal for 100 miles and it changes nothing. He is not listening. He already knows the way. The Pol-21M was shouting into a radio the drone had already switched off. So the jamming that had stopped so many others simply washed over these drones and did nothing. The invisible wall was still standing, but the things it was built to stop had learned to walk through it blind. And then, as the first drone broke clear of the interference and the target resolved in front of it, the great rolling doors of the Elektrostal warehouse began to lift. Right on schedule, in perfect step with Kotovsk. Two sites hundreds of miles apart opening their doors to the same night. The countdown had begun. Now the waiting was over. At Kotovsk, the first drone came down through the open bay and detonated inside the structure. This was the whole point of the timing. A warhead striking a sealed roof spends its energy on concrete and steel, but this one crossed the threshold of an open door and burst inside the building, where the fire had room to breathe and everything it needed to feed on. The warheads were incendiary. They did not just blast, they lit. Inside, the fire found a landscape built to burn. Shrink-wrapped pallets, cardboard stacked to the ceiling, plastic packaging by the ton, racked in long aisles that ran the length of the floor. The flame did not stay in one place, it ran. Down the rows, shelf to shelf, faster than any crew could have hoped to contain it, even if a crew had been standing ready. And they were not. It was 0245 and the doors were open. Then the fire reached the things that were not on the retail manifest. Whatever was staged inside for the front, the components, the batteries, the fuel in the trucks still backed against the docks, began to catch. A burning warehouse is one fire. A warehouse full of volatile cargo is a chain of them. Secondary blasts tore through the structure, each one throwing burning material into the next aisle, seeding the next fire before the last had peaked. The truck fuel went. The packed lithium cells went, venting and flaring in bright, hard bursts. One reaction fed the next, and the whole interior turned into a single self-sustaining blaze that no longer needed the drone that started it. Hundreds of miles away, Elektrostal was burning to the same clock. The second wave came in off its inertial run, broke through the last of the jamming, and lined up on a target that had no idea the navigation blackout had failed. The doors had just rolled up for the night shift. The drones put their warheads straight through the opening, penetrate, ignite, and let the building do the rest. The same logic that had gutted Kotovsk now playing out on Moscow's doorstep. But Elektrostal carried a weight Kotovsk did not: location. This was not some refinery lost in the Tambov countryside. This was a fire less than 40 miles from the Kremlin, close enough that its glow reached the edge of the capital's night sky. The inside of the warehouse went the way the first one had: incendiary catching on packaging, flames sprinting down the racks, the staged military cargo cooking off in hard secondary bursts, batteries vented. Whatever fuel was on site fed the blaze. The structure began folding in on itself as the fire ate through its supports. And there was a second message buried in the geography. For years, the airspace around Moscow had been sold as impenetrable, the most defended sky in the country, layered with guns and jammers and interceptors. To have a hub burning inside that shield at the same minute as 300 miles deeper in said something the Panzer and the Pole 21M could not answer. The wall around the capital had a door in it, and someone had just walked through carrying fire. Two hubs, one country apart, both venting flame into the dark at nearly the same minute. At Kotovsk, air defense had been too slow. At Elektrostal, it had been aimed at the wrong problem entirely. Neither had stopped a thing. By dawn, both hubs were gutted. When the smoke finally thinned, the accounting began, and the numbers were brutal. According to Ukrainian estimates, the two strikes had wiped out cargo and storage worth around $1.3 billion and erased somewhere between 10 and 15% of Wildberries' total warehousing capacity in a single night. These are figures claimed by the Ukrainian side, and the full extent of the damage is difficult to verify independently. But the images of two gutted mega hubs, hundreds of miles apart, told their own story. Whatever the exact tally, this was not a dent. It was a hole blown through the middle of a national logistics network. But the dollar figure was never the real target. The real target was the disguise itself. The entire value of a hidden supply node is that no one strikes it. Russia had learned to tuck military cargo inside civilian infrastructure precisely because civilian infrastructure is supposed to be off the board. Too ordinary, too public, too awkward to hit. That camouflage bought safety. This operation took the safety away. By reaching 300 miles inside Russian territory and burning down two sites that were, on paper, just warehouses, Ukraine sent a message that no amount of commercial packaging changes what a building is being used for. Every logistics hub quietly feeding the front is now a question mark. And the answer Russia is left with is expensive. Disperse the cargo across more sites, harden more of them, pull scarce air defense back from the front to cover the deep rear, or accept that the hidden nodes are not hidden anymore. For years, the civilian shell was the shield. On this night, it became the marker on the map. If you found this breakdown worth your time, subscribe and hit the bell. We take apart one of these long-range operations every week. The tactics, the technology, and the reasons things unfold the way they do. And here's the question worth arguing over in the comments. Facing strikes like this, what should Russia actually do? Scatter its supplies across dozens of smaller depots and lose all efficiency, or concentrate its air defense on the deep rear and leave the front more exposed? There may not be a good answer. Tell us which bad one you'd pick.